Welcome to the Come Home Podcast, the place where we connect with experts, leaders, and advocates who are all on a mission to create an emotionally intelligent world. Here, we dive into the realm of human development, sharing insights, experiences, and the incredible work happening in this field. I'm Griffin Gervais, the founder of Come Home, where we partner with industries and organizations to develop their emotional intelligence and cultivate a more emotionally connected world. Through our conversations on this podcast, we seek to inspire, educate, and empower individuals like you to tap into the power of emotional intelligence for personal growth and collective impact. Today, I am honored to be joined by Kendra Miller, Senior Wellbeing and Personal Development Manager at Torrent Consulting. Kendra, welcome to the Come Home Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. You and I have spent a lot of time connecting outside of this space and really just being individuals who value emotional intelligence, value taking care of people, and really feeling a little bit of isolated in that bubble. And so being able to spend time together to brainstorm, to problem solve has been amazing. So I'm excited to bring that conversation here now to share with people the work that you do specifically, and also just a lot of what you and I already talked about.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I love our conversations.
Yeah, so I want to start with a question I ask everyone. So my company's Come Home, and so when you hear Come Home, also knowing what it's connected to, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I love this question because I think we are all trying to discover who we are, and we've probably maybe lost touch with that along the way, or maybe didn't even fully discover it in the first place. Mm-hmm. But by the time we get old enough to start engaging in the workplace, or starting that career, figuring out how to focus on dreams or meaning in our lives, I think we're also influenced by so many other variables, culture being one of the big ones. And I think for myself and a lot of people that I talk to, when I think of Come Home, it's the journey that we're all on, which is to strip away the messages, the values that we don't really adhere to, but maybe we've subtly taken on as our own, and really figure out who am I? Yeah. Get back to who we are, or maybe discover some language to describe who we are that feels right, and not just who we think we're supposed to be. Yeah. I love the idea of come home and coming home to ourselves and settling in, getting to know who we are and settling into that. And I think from there, you can live so congruently. You can live so authentically. When you can show up in any space and know, I'm at home with myself. Yeah. And that's all that I really need. Yeah.
I love that. I'm curious, in your evolution, in your experience, you talk about the experiences, the stories, the layers. As you were growing up, is that something that there was awareness around, where you kind of did that journey, or were there certain moments where you really were challenged when you never really thought you needed to go there, that made you start peeling those layers back?
Yeah, I think where to even begin with all of that? I will say my upbringing and my parents created an environment that was really rich for being in touch with who we were, discussion. I'm one of 3 girls, and I just think we didn't really ever envy each other or were jealous of each other's gifts or ways of being. We kind of celebrated each other. Sure. I know there was a lot done well to make that kind of upbringing possible. Okay. But I will say some of the things that we know, and I was a psychology major, and I love, any tools and resources out there that help us better understand and give language to who we are. So kind of looking back and learning some things about birth order. Yeah. I was that middle child, people pleaser. I am a 9 on the Enneagram, and so kind of a bit of a numbness to self was absolutely present. And I think I kind of even would poke fun at myself about those things, that I don't have feelings, or that I don't, that I would just go with the flow with anything. Yeah. And I think over time, realizing, looking back, I did have feelings about things, or I did kind of leave with a sense of conviction on something. When I look back and see it, it's like, oh, there you were. So one of the things that helped me in my 30s to give language to that and reflect and realize and kind of do some of the uncovering and coming back to myself, coming home to myself, was doing personal why discovery based on like Simon Sinek's work.
Yep.
And that's one of the things we do at Torrent too. We help people kind of walk through important moments in their life that were defining. And when I did that for myself, I was able to recognize moments in my teens where I opted to do some things differently that were kind of countercultural to the culture I was a part of at that time, but that was aligned with my values. Like I was making a choice that was different from the group that I don't think I really realized, like, oh, there you are. Like, you know, there are those threads of me that were there that I personally had to do digging probably in my 30s. And I'm sure I did in my 20s too along the way. But just to like go back and realize like you were there all along, even if at times that felt muted, or like you were just part of this larger crowd. But so definitely it took time for me to kind of find my own voice and all of that.
And I think it does for everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
It's you feel the same?
Yeah, I did. You know, I think growing up, I had a loving, nurturing environment. Yeah. Only child, people pleaser, and a 9. So interesting piece there. But similarly, I'm able to look back too and go, you know, was I crystal clear on what I stood for, who I was, all of this stuff? Probably not. Just falling into, especially growing up in sports and stuff like that, just diving right into, you know, this is what it looks like. But, you know, also having moments of, like you said, like knowing, oh, I did stuff this way, and like that was my characteristics and qualities shining, right? But for me, it really kicked off when I started to become an educator, because that's when I really was challenged with, how do I connect with people who didn't grow up like me and don't look like me? Yeah. And right there, it was academics didn't matter at that point. I needed to put all that to the side to go, how do we just connect human to human? And so, like you're sharing, when I started to learn more about how that happens, when I started to learn more about things like emotional intelligence and how to do these things, the more time you spend in it, the more reflective you become, right? That helps you shape and navigate your experiences. So, you know, I kind of think about it in terms of like food, right? We all have, or we all want to go try foods to figure out what we like. Yes. But as a kid, it's like, I'm gonna just try whatever, and you try and you're like, oh, I like this, I like that, and the same thing. Like as we get older, we try foods, and then we're like, oh, this one I like, this one I don't. Yeah. Same thing for us as people. It's like, I need to go through experiences. Which ones resonate? Why do they resonate? Yep. Which ones teach me lessons? And then how do I just keep going? Yeah, and try on behaviors. And I mean, the amount of times that I have seen other people do something, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try that on for size, and love it or don't. I mean, I can think of moments where it's just like, why did I even do that? And I know very clearly, like, I was trying it out. Yeah. And probably needed to know, like, oh, that's just not me. And that's okay. Yeah. That works for that person, and that joke can land for them. But, like, I try it, and I'm like, I think I made someone feel uncomfortable, and I don't want that. I would prefer helping them feel comfortable than getting the laugh, you know, for instance. So, like, I think we all probably go through, like, trying on behaviors for size, seeing what works, seeing what fits us, and leaving behind what doesn't. Yeah. I don't want to jump the gun, but I want to ask you, like, how does that whole idea of try on behaviors, try, right? Like, don't be afraid to step into that. How does that show up in Torrent? And how is that does that live and breathe in your company? Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. I feel like I used to be, so I've been at Torrent 7.5 years. Mm-hmm. We're 12 years old now, I think. So when I came on board, we were only about like 4.5 years old. We've grown a lot. I used to be more involved in
employee orientation. I'm not in that world anymore, but that would be a lot of the things that I would tell our new hires was like, we're inviting you into growth and change, and honestly, if you're not open to that, you may not feel like you fit here. This may not be the place for you, because we're from the get-go saying we want you to explore, try, grow, learn new ways of doing and being that we think are healthy and good for our culture, or good for you in your role, or good for you as just a human, because we care about you as a human.
Sure.
So yeah, I think we invite people into that a lot, and there's an expectation that if something's not working for you in that role or with your teammate or in our culture, that you're gonna try to work on thinking about and doing that differently.
That's so cool. I think about, from my perspective, and a lot of the things that I firmly believe is all of these things are skills, right? So how can you work the muscle and the skill of trying something new, right? Embracing change, whatever that is. I'm curious, you're talking about some of these pieces of teams, or even with the new employees. What are some things at Torrent that you guys do that really structurally supports those spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because the reality is, like anything human relationships, we can know what we want it to look and feel like, but if we don't build the structure to make it happen, then that's just a dream and a hope, right? Like, and yet I think when it kind of makes it feel at the onset for people, it feels a little less natural. Like, what? I've gotta do these certain things, or be a part of this coaching relationship, and it's like, it's a bit of trust the process. Like, this will get you and us where we want to go. So I think the structure that we've built in is huge. So we do have a couple things that I'll note that help. We have a coaching relationship that everybody in the company, immediately they have a coach. Now, that's not a professional coach, but we do train them to have what we call like a coach-like presence.
Sure.
That's very inquisitive, asking questions, creating a supportive relationship, giving space to talk about whatever's important to that employee. We call them Torrent guys. So in those spaces, which they meet weekly to talk about like wins, stucks, how can I support you? They meet monthly to talk about growth and development. And in that space, there's a lot of ability and freedom to talk about like, if you are trying on something new and you've never done this before, you build this relationship up over time, where when I ask our people about their well-being, like what's one of the things we do at Torrent that most impacts your overall well-being, which we define as like being the best version of yourself, becoming the best version of yourself. Best doesn't equal perfect. It just means I'm feeling good and healthy for this season that I'm in.
Yeah.
Like, when I ask them, what do we do at Torrent, or what do we provide that best supports your well-being? Time and time again, they say, my coaching relationship. Having this space with this person who shows up ready and willing to listen to me, cares about my success. So that's one thing structurally that immediately from the get-go. And I know for some people that's awkward at first. They're like, so what are we meeting to talk about? And it's like, sometimes you're just talking about life. Sometimes you're just talking about what's happening in your world. So that's one thing. We do start as soon as people are hired, they do Clifton Strengths.
Okay.
And so we do try to focus on building a culture of strengths. And I have found that digging into and having conversations around strengths is huge into kind of uncovering more about yourself, deepening that self-awareness, exposing areas where you could grow and do things, differently, but still from a place that's true to who you are. So we focus on strengths. We do really intentional staffing, try to make sure that people are staffed on projects that fit their skill sets and or stretch their skill sets. So that's a consideration that's taken as we're trying to staff. So again, moments where you could kind of like grow and push into like, oh, you've been maybe an analyst and been on the support side of a project, but you want to start to learn how to lead meetings more. Well, we can kind of staff you to have some of those responsibilities in this project, or make sure that we arrange our team so that you can try that on and see if you like it, and if you do, how you can continue to grow to that end. So there's a lot. I'm trying to think of what else. I'm like, I wrote a few notes.
Well,
but
it sounds like really foundationally, you're there to support and nurture and grow people.
Yes.
And there also is a little bit of capacity to actually really grow from within.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you were just saying that last example. Having these experiences to then spark your curiosity to be like, you know, would I want to do something like this? And actually having an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of empowerment that comes in that. I'll speak for myself and just my progression. But as I was growing through education, I normally found I left when I felt like I hit this ceiling where no one was there to put me or give me the education or the experience to get in that next position. Almost where I felt like capped.
Like progress?
Yeah.
Like you couldn't keep making progress?
Yeah, like I couldn't, it was like, all right, I'm here, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
We got that under our belt, and then it's like me naturally as someone who is a constant learner, I'm like, no, like, where's that thing? Like, I'm ready to keep growing and developing. And when I noticed there was a cap, I always left.
Yeah.
I always left to go, well, I guess I got to create it on my own.
Yeah.
Right? And so to hear that there can be nurturing to grow from within is, I think, really empowering to an individual, because they can take agency over their own growth and development.
Yeah. And that's been important to us from the beginning. I mean, I remember thinking through career pathing and how that can look, you know, less like a ladder and more like a rock climbing wall.
Yes.
And
that's how I see it.
Yes, and it is. And I think when you think like that, and I think culturally we're in that space more nowadays than we would have been 15, 20 years ago in organizations and just what we mean by career development. Some people still have kind of a straight track, but I think knowing that you change career, like full careers, like I'm in this industry and I'm in a different one now, like there has to be space for us to think about this from a more generous and broader perspective, which I think does give people freedom and excitement. I will say too, though, as we've gotten bigger, when we were younger and smaller, and it was like, oh, we have a need and somebody's willing, and it's okay if they don't have the experience, we'll figure it out, we'll train them up. Like, we had a lot more freedom to do that. We're at 140, 145 people now. It is harder to do that because you have your roles and you have your ways of working. So I do think that I don't want to romanticize it and make it seem like anyone can just kind of do whatever they want when they want it. But I will say that we have the relationships and the conversations in place where someone could express, like, hey, I'm thinking about this and I would love to try it. And if that coach or manager knows that's important to you, well, what would it look like if we could staff you on a couple of projects in that capacity? Or what would it look like if you took on something different to try that out? I think there's still room to get creative.
Sure.
Even if it, you know, feels a little bit more directed than it did before, but I think we still value that.
And I wanna connect it back to what I heard you say before, because in my experience within education and also supporting educational institutions and companies, is what I notice is what we were saying before, the structures aren't in place. So the ideas there, the dreams there, the understandings there, it's like, let's go here. But what I work with them a lot on is, well, if we're gonna go here, we also have to flip to the other side to figure out what are those structures that are gonna actually let that live and breathe.
Yeah.
And you guys have that.
Yeah.
So it's really cool because I hear you reflecting on, like, well, we're getting larger and, like, you know, how people still have the freedom, but this navigation. But the beauty in what I hear you sharing is you have the structures to be able to go there.
Yes.
To be able to listen, to be able to hear. Because how often does a conversation get brought up or a topic need to be addressed? but it just gets pushed, and it just gets pushed, and it just gets pushed. Why? Because the structures and systems aren't actually in place to allow that conversation to sit at the table.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, you have to have, from the beginning, you have to have buy-in. Your leaders have to believe that this is not only valuable, but worth it to put the time and energy into creating those structures. I just had a conversation with someone the other day where they were in the context of talking about emotional intelligence. They were talking about a previous employer, and it was just not a great experience. And at one point in the conversation, they're like, I kind of feel bad because I loved the leaders. They're actually two of my good friends, but the culture and that employment experience wasn't great. And I'm like, well, that just goes to show that you can have like good people, and you can say like, we value this, but if you don't actually do the hard work of the stage setting and the structures to make it possible, you're not going to get there. And it is that both and of like, you got to believe it and want it, but then you've got to do the hard work of creating something to make it possible.
So what is that? Like, maybe for you specifically, or even maybe you look at it through the lens of like your leadership team, right? Through our conversations and through what you're sharing is nurturing people, supporting people, pouring into their well-being, developing them is really important. And also it lives and breathes. So how do those actually connect? What does it take from you guys in order to get there?
Yeah. I mean, my mind could go all over the place. And I know
Let it go, I'll follow you.
Good, because I'll get lost. And I know I've shared a few of the things, like that coaching structure. When I started 7.5 years ago, that was like one of the first projects. It was like, how do we focus on our people from more than just a work or productivity perspective? So I got to kind of play with like, and we iterated and made mistakes and over-engineered those conversations for a long time to finally get to a good place of like, what's just enough structure so we're all doing somewhat of the same thing that we think supports this, and then where's their freedom for individualization. So that we finally kind of got there into, I think, a bit of a sweet spot.
Okay.
I will say our leaders, our CEO leads with passion and purpose. Our leadership team, like, you don't have to convince anyone that focusing on well-being or focusing on our people is important and necessary. So again, I think not only having people who believe in that, but then do their own work over and over and over again is, and sometimes that's us creating the stage for them to do that. I know a lot of times our leadership team will reflect together, and in that reflection, there's a lot of vulnerability, a lot. So that's the stage setting and creating the space. That's the structure, and then from there, you getting together a team of 10 to 12 people that talk about how they've experienced change this year, or how they've had to learn the value that they bring now that their role has changed and they're less in the weeds, and they can't judge the success of their day based on what they accomplished because they're not doing anymore. That's identity stuff, right? And so they're iterating and they're thinking about it differently, and they're like, talking about how they wrestled with it. And so creating space for leaders to come together and just keep coming back to like, okay, this is important work, and I'm still going through the work, and we intentionally define a well-being with this present, ongoing, like becoming the best version of yourself, because we never stop. Like we're always on the journey, right? So even things like that, like the meaning of language, when we talk about the definition.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, because it's funny. I can go both ways. Sometimes we can just circle on a term, and I might get to a point where I'm like, I don't know. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, I think we're saying the same thing, just a little bit differently, and that's not the end of the world. And there are some times where it's like, no, this really does matter. Like we need to say this well to describe what we mean. And I think there's been a lot of intentionality over the years around that too.
I feel like I had an answer when I asked you that question of like what I would think.
What did you think?
And you said it.
Okay.
I should have probably told you that, but no, for me and what I've noticed, one, being a leader within an organization, going through this transformation, or really foundationally grounding ourselves in this kind of work, and is you have to embody it yourself.
Yeah.
Like if you, and that's where I was thinking was like, in my world, from an outsider perspective, hearing you say everything you're saying, for me, the answer would be, well, the leaders just embody it.
Yeah.
Right? That's why it lives and breathes, is because it's not this little thing that lives over here. It's actually meaningful and connected to them. And, language and how you structure things, it's like, that's them as humans, and that's just coming through.
Yeah.
Which is critical, because if you're not a leader that embodies this work, it's not going to translate.
Yeah. And then, things like core values that stem from all of that allows you to have a shared language, so that when something that feels like not quite right, but you're not sure why, because it's not this really tangible skill set like leading a discovery call or building, a solution to a problem. It's more of like, what just happened in that moment that didn't feel quite right, or did feel really great, and here's why. So like things like our core values, or putting language to things around well-being and personal development is huge for our people, or what motivates employees and what might be missing when someone's struggling. I think about things that I use a lot, like the CAMPS model from Life Lab Learning. CAMPS are like these 5 main motivators for employees: certainty, autonomy, meaning, progress, and social inclusion. And often when people are going through change or hardship, or might be experiencing like teetering on burnout, when we have language to go through, it's like, oh, what's compromised right now for you? What's threatened or weak or missing completely? How do we come around you and help get you back to a point where you're feeling that again? I mean, frameworks and language that we adopt, and we take the time to, we prioritize the time to learn and use, I think are really helpful too, because when you get into what you want to do with all of this emotional intelligence and embodying it, it can be, kind of hard to pin down sometimes.
Yeah.
You know it when you feel it, and it's present, and you know it when it's absent. But sometimes to say what exactly was that is hard.
Yeah, what's the thing?
Yeah. So I think for us, putting language to it,
Totally.
at times too, being able to call it out and say that was really good, and here's why.
Totally. And in my experience with the research and work that I've done, and with the way that I train, and the resources out of Yale and their Center for Emotional Intelligence, it's helped tremendously, because we talk about these things, everything that you've kind of named, but it's like, here's the actual resource, framework, tool that allows us to pin this down.
Yeah.
Right? And what I hear you say too, and I think the more experience and the more reps you have with a certain tool or whatever, that's when you get to find the freedom in it.
Yes.
Right? So you're like, hey, here's this non-negotiable thing that we use, and there's the play within the framework.
Yeah. Which I find, in our workplace, and this might be true for a lot of workplaces, and I think cultures have personalities, that's what makes it a culture, so it's going to be different from organization to organization, but our culture and our people are a really lovely balance of, I think, the head and the heart. They are, they're consultants, they're building solutions on the Salesforce platform, they are technical, they love process, and so I have found that a balance is really helpful and necessary for myself too, but for them as well. If I were just to come in and say, how are you feeling today? And what do you want to do with those feelings? Valuable conversation, but I think for them to do this work in the workplace, it might be a bit of a struggle. So a lot of times when I can come with data or a framework or why this is helpful and meaningful, I think they're probably better poised to receive it and then try to put it into practice for themselves. And that's been a dance and a nuance to find over time, but I think some balance of having those frameworks is helpful.
I want to ask you the impact that it's had, having these frameworks, having certain language. What's the impact been like, knowing that you have different cultures represented? And I'm not talking about, and for people listening, I'm not talking about organizational culture, I'm talking about individual culture. You have offices all over the world. How has common language impacted that?
Yeah, it's been huge. So we do, pre-pandemic, we had offices in like 4 or 5 different cities, and then in Antigua, Guatemala. Now we still kind of have some concentrations of people in certain cities, but we have a lot of remote employees too. So we have changed a lot. But yes, we do have employees in the United States and in Guatemala. And actually I was there this summer, and my colleague and I did some focus groups while we were there around leadership, and really digging into like, do you define leadership differently? Do you think about it differently based on like what you see in the U.S. versus what you see in Guatemala? And I think cultural differences based on country certainly come into play. Sure. We think about things differently. The United States is much more rugged individualist. Guatemala is much more collectivistic, hierarchical. So workplaces there, like a lot of our Guatemalan employees have said, like, nobody's going to ask me how I'm doing or care. It's just kind of like, come in, do your work. Yeah. And there's definitely like a sense of scarcity in a lot of the workplaces there. Like, if I don't do this well, I could be out and the next person's in, kind of thing. So certainly the culture in the country of origin is impacted there. But what came out of those focus groups that I was honestly surprised by, it was a little like, if I had a hypothesis going into those, I really thought that they were going to be like, oh yes, U.S. leadership kind of looks like this, and Guatemalan leadership looks like this, and so it's kind of challenging maybe at times to bridge the gap and view it the same way. And they were like, no, it's more, what's really been helpful is that we have this like torrent culture that supersedes country, which is really cool. They're like,
that's a cool way to think about it.
It is, and I was like, awesome. Okay, good. So they're like, I feel, and again, this was because we were in Guatemala, we were only talking to our Guatemalan tour guides, but same conversations could be had with U.S. tour guides. But they just mentioned, like, I know that I'm valued the moment that I walk in the door, and I know that I'm seen as an equal and cherished as a part of this team. So that is a beautifully kind of like leveling the playing field. Thing that I was just like, this is really powerful. What was exposed though is part of the challenges that come with like learning business consulting, Salesforce, all of the things in a second or third language is really one of the bigger challenges for a lot of people. So it's like, okay, this is good for us to learn and think about, and how do we come around that? But I mean, I think that knowing that we can kind of create our own culture that bridges across the countries and helps our people, regardless of where you're physically located, to show up in a way that we're trying to create and make possible. That was really affirming that was, felt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that
It's
answers
really
your
cool.
question.
No, No, I think that's, that's one of those stories that you share that really like lands just the impact of the work you guys do. Pulling out of that a little bit of what you were sharing, I think the idea of defining things as individuals is so important, right? Like, you and I can both experience something, be in the same room, experience something, and you're going to have your own whole perception of what it was, how it felt, all this stuff, and it's like, well, is that the same as mine?
Yeah.
Right? And just allowing the space to share can give us so much feedback and information that we're like, wow, right? What things actually do align? What things don't align? Where can these things blend together? Like, I think so often we want to move fast, so we assume people know. Yeah. And specifically then when you're talking culturally, it's like, no, we gotta take this word, we gotta take this idea, let's unpack it. Like, if we can root ourselves in unpacking it, then we'll have clarity on where everyone stands. And it creates this, like, I believe, I'm sharing my opinion here, I believe when that happens, people feel seen. Yes. And they feel heard and valued. Because they're like, oh wow, they took the time to really understand where I'm coming from in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's huge, and it is hard. I mean, when we talk about emotional intelligence and when we talk about what we've been able to create and experience at Torrent, a lot of that too has been built and birthed out of hardship and misunderstanding and hurt and struggle. So I definitely don't want anyone to think like, oh, this is just this lovely little culture that we create and we live it out, and it's, you know, a lot of times it feels really good, but there are times too where it feels really hard because we are human and we're showing up with our ways of thinking and being that are uniquely ours, and we misunderstand and or look at things differently and disagree. And I think that the value of that's worth taking the time to wrestle through and figure out together is huge. And yeah, I mean, when you said like going fast, I mean, I think of really early on when I started at Torrent. And so just a little bit of background there. I was coming from a higher ed background, college student affairs, and Torrent, because we were growing, and Daniel, as our CEO, had been really involved in every aspect of the business, but was beginning to realize like, okay, in order to help us grow and, you know, focus on some other things that we need to be focusing on, he was going to be less involved in the day-to-day, what's going on with each of our employees. And so this kind of perfect timing of me leaving student affairs and him wanting someone to kind of come in and think about our people from that human development side of things was just really great timing. That said, I mean, I was nervous as all get out. Like, I don't know technology. I'm really one of the least technical people. Are you sure you want me in here? Higher education is very different in so many ways from business. So I was like, again, are you sure that this is what you want? And I probably spent my first year and a half really trying to understand what value I did bring, or understand how to voice what I believed or felt in that moment, when it felt like what we need is to go fast, and we need to create, and we need to make progress, and that needed done yesterday. And I'm highly relational and totally comfortable with the fact that relationships and growth take time. We can be slow in getting there. And so a lot of conversations early on were challenging about that, you know, of just like, okay, what's expected, and how fast can someone, you know, be get up to speed, you know, when they're new here. And I'm like, beats me. I don't know. I mean, it could be 4 months for one person. It could be a year and a half for another person. Like, I just wasn't able to give some of the answers that I think at times we were looking for to scale quickly. And that's a hard, I think we were willing to wrestle with that and not take ourselves too seriously along the way of like being comfortable with iterating and trying and hearing each other and honoring each other's gifts. And also, I think with a strengths perspective, being able to say at times like, that's not mine. I don't know that I'm the person to be doing that.
I think I always come back to, you know, whenever I talk emotional intelligence, whenever I'm in that space with leaders, it's always around actually mastering the art of slowing down in order to go fast. When you're able to slow down, you are going 10 times faster because you're really mastering the moment rather than everything we're talking about, all the assumptions, all the invalidating, dismissing, like, we just gotta go. And it's like, no. Those are the people who are gonna be doing it, right? Like, how can we master the art of slowing down? I wanna ask you this though. You said before, you were like, I want people to know there was a lot of struggle. There's still, I mean, we're all humans. Businesses are growing too, and like, there are struggles. There's pain. There's all these things. How has emotional intelligence in developing that and kind of building that into your culture, how has that supported being able to navigate through that? Because I think a lot of leaders, I think a lot of companies, organizations, regardless of what industry it is, struggle to be in the struggle or be in the uncomfortable conversations or the pain of certain things. So how has emotional intelligence helped you guys leverage those situations?
I mean, I think the fact that I would say even if we've grown in emotional intelligence, understanding what it is, how we're applying it, that there are skill sets that we can learn. It has been present from the very beginning that our leaders were leading or always trying to lead with some kind of level of emotional intelligence. Sure. And I think that's why from the very beginning it's always been not people over business or business over people, but that both are valued and needed. And so we've constantly, I feel like, done this dance of trying to lead with both in mind. So all that said, I think there's probably ways of thinking about people that we've just continued to kind of drip in there. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is assume positive intent. You know, humans make assumptions like that, and the majority of the time I assume my intentions are good and pure and yours are not. Yours are less than. I mean, that's just our automatic reaction.
Totally.
So the more we learn, like, what's our default? Okay, that's what that is. So how do we lean into assuming positive intent? I'm going to try to believe that you didn't intend to hurt me. So then I'm also going to learn about how to have a difficult conversation well. I'm going to learn a framework, SBI, situation, behavior, impact, right? How do I say this in a way that doesn't come at you, like, why did you do that? But instead, hey, Griffin, here's this situation, here's this moment in this meeting. And when you spoke over me, I was talking, but then you talked, and I didn't get a chance to finish. The impact on me is that I feel like I'm not valued in that moment. Can we talk about that? To equip our people with frameworks like that, where they can have conversations that need to be had. I'm not saying again, there's no false peace here.
Sure.
We're not trying to create this lovely little harmonious space that doesn't actually get real. We want to get real, we want to be real, but we want to do it in a healthy way. Yeah. And so I think that that's always been there. Like, we've always tried, how do we approach relationships from a healthy perspective? So things like assume positive intent. How do we think about, approaching difficult conversations in a way that honors the integrity of both people? Yeah. How do we deliver feedback and praise? How do we know that people need recognition? How do we do that well? Or recognize when it's missing? Things like strengths. So many of our Torrent guides have achiever as one of their top 5 strengths. Okay. Well, we know one of the challenges of achievers is they don't stop to celebrate. They're just like, go, next, achieve, what's the next thing? And putting that up against the fact that people need to be recognized, people need to be valued. So we can kind of build that in, build a structure again, where that's remembered. Or we can point to, like, gosh, what's off here? Why is this person struggling? When is the last time you called them out for something good that they've done? So I think that there's a lot of those types of things, and I don't even, it is the focus on human development, personal development, well-being. We started our focus on well-being in 2018. And so that was this bit of a shift to, like, who is this whole person here in front of us that's not just an employee, but, has this life happening and dreams, desires. And so that's kind of where the shift and the focus on well-being started, although without it being overtly called out, I think it was always there. But that, has helped us realize, like, when things are hard or when there's struggle or when there's an issue, nobody gets like a hall pass to just skate over that, pretend like it's not happening. It's like, no, if you want to do this well, you're going to need to address it, or you're going to need to talk about it.
I keep going back every time you're sharing examples and you're telling stories. It's like it's so rooted in frameworks, language, and tools, right? Because think about it, and I'm going to go to, like, a child, right? A child is upset when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and they don't have language, they don't have understanding. So how does that show up? Crying, screaming, right? Tantrum. Then they start to learn language. They start to learn ways to effectively and in a healthy way express themselves, whether it's, I'm upset this happened, or whatever it is. And it's like, they need the experience and they need the tools in their toolkit to be able to access that.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're doing for people within the workplace. It's like, this is who we are, this is what we're here to do, and this is how we're going to support you as humans, because those all are all going to translate to their home lives and everything else, right? I'm sure you have so many celebrations and stories about how those tools and frameworks and language impacted outside of the workplace.
Definitely.
But they're able then to step into that. Why? Because they feel equipped.
Yeah, they do, and that is huge. But when you think about, and I, for better or for worse, I kind of bring just a relational lens into the workplace. So when you think about a partnership, where it's just you and your partner, that in and of itself takes a ton of work to connect to, where we learn how to have difficult conversations or not have them is from our family of origin.
Yeah.
So you bring two people together and you say, hey, here, go and live well together and have a healthy relationship. It's a ton of work if they're willing to go there and do it. It's not much different in the workplace. We're saying we're inviting you into something that we think is really healthy and good. Not perfect, but healthy and good. But in order for you to enter into this and be a part of it, you're probably going to have to learn new ways of being and approaching things that maybe you've never learned before.
Yeah.
And we'll teach you along the way, and we'll talk about those things. And it will take time, but yes, you have to have a common language, you have to have common frameworks that you're working from, or else we're all shooting from the hip and doing what we've either learned from families of origin or other work experiences that we've had that are often not healthy or helpful, or that we carry our baggage from. So it's really huge. It makes me think of, well, to your point, yes, I've done well-being coaching or personal why discovery and have seen people go on to pursue counseling or to have conversations with spouses or to kind of reconcile some things that they hadn't reconciled before because of the work that we're doing there, which is really cool. Another thing that comes to mind too is talking with someone who had been at the organization for probably 8 to 10 months. I was checking in, they'd recently become a coach, and so I was seeing how that was going, and they were telling me about how this is working out, and it was hard at first, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. And they said, you all talked about, when I started, you all talked about how, to kind of trust what we're trying to do here. And you invited us into caring about one another and sharing a little bit more than maybe we typically would have in a previous environment, talking about our well-being with each other. Like, you invited us into this. And this person was like, I see it now, like 10 months in. And they're like, I wish you could have forced us to do it so that I didn't miss all that time.
Sure.
And I'm like, I wish we could too. But we can't. We can, and that wouldn't be it.
You're ready when you're ready.
We invite you into it, and you explore as you go, and through your own experiences along the way, you'll see why we feel like this is the best way that we could be leading within our business. Yeah.
It's like, how many times have we in our own lives been told something that we didn't do, told again, didn't do, told again, didn't do, told again, didn't do, and then one point we're like, man, I got to do that, and the person's like, I've been telling you, and you're like, well, I wasn't ready for it, and now I am.
Yes.
Right? And it's that, but going back to frameworks and structure and language, it's like, we're going to invite you, here's the space, have it, and they're on their own timeline, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's like, there's no, I think a lot of times people teeter this like, but is it mandatory, do we have to, all this stuff, and it's like, but what if you just created the structures, right? What if you just created the space? What if you really started to embody this and let it run its course? Could you trust that, right? Yeah, and knowing that what you're being invited into is, honestly, it's a good thing, so it's, even if it's scary. So one example, like with coaches and talking about well-being, for some people that is not what they've experienced. Like, you're my coach and I just met you a month ago, and you want to know how I'm doing in my well-being, which is, mental, emotional, social, physical, financial, career. And for some, they might feel like, no, I don't want to go there. And of course I want to protect. We're not looking to push somebody to do something that they
feel completely uncomfortable or don't align
Sure.
with. However, if they feel completely uncomfortable with our discussions around well-being, once again, it might be like, is this a culture fit? Because we value this at Torrent, so we are going to invite you into it. From the coach's side, I'm like, listen, encourage them to try a little bit, try on this behavior a little bit. So say they're setting a goal in financial well-being to pay off debt.
Sure.
Do they need to disclose to their coach how much debt,
Yeah.
what all they spent that money on? No, but like
Yeah.
to be able to say, yeah, I got this small little credit card that I'm paying off,
Yeah.
and here's, I'm going to save in 3 different ways, and then 3 months later to be able to come back and be like, I did it.
Yeah.
Like, that's really cool, and we can celebrate together.
Sure.
Financial, I share that one just because I know that's a hard one. Not a lot of
Sure.
people would want to share, and you don't have to.
Yeah.
But if it's something that's weighing on you and that you're focusing on, like, what would it look like for you just to try a
Yeah.
little bit to share and go into that space with someone else?
I would assume I would assume that sending these structures, putting all this stuff in place, creating a culture and an organization that really is foundationally built off of this, you're hiring the people who fit that.
Yes.
Right? I would assume that your process now and how you hire and bring in people is very much aligned with what they would see on the other side. So you probably don't run into too many, I don't know if I want to do this, because that's a pull to why people would want to work there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, focus on well-being, and the fact that there's a role like mine, I mean, is one thing that so many of our new employees are like, yeah, that was really appealing.
Yeah.
Because it's a responsibility that I take very seriously, that as they're looking for a new employer, just the fact that someone within the organization is always thinking about these things
Sure.
is such an appeal, which is so cool to hear about and validate this work.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the structure, the language, the tools, all within the context of relationship.
Yeah.
If we just kept doing workshops and said, okay, go out and try it, and never had spaces like coaching or managers and directors and leaders who are really intentional in how they show up each and every day, the structures and the frameworks would fall flat. But when those two things are paired, really meaningful relationships and the language and the structure to come around it, it's huge.
It won't work if there's no implementation support or
Yeah.
integration system.
Yeah.
Right? So, Kendra, this is awesome.
Good.
I love talking with you. I feel like Torrent is so much on the forefront of what companies need to be heading in, just very candidly, just developing these structures, putting these systems in place, putting these positions. You don't know how many times I talk with people to be like, it needs to happen now that there needs to be a chief of human development, a chief of emotional intelligence. Like that world has to be starting to be structurally developed.
Yeah.
And so just to know you're leading that charge, and also Torrent is in the direction of leading that, is incredible. So I appreciate the time as always. Before we leave, I want to ask you one question, and I'm going to put Torrent to the side right now, but take you and your experience and how you show up. I know you mentioned a lot about being relational. So I'm curious to know, if you could be known for one word, have this lasting legacy, what would that be?
It's a great question. Really hard to boil down to one word. Seeing others, making them feel seen.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.